Hello guys and welcome to my new video. So today I decided to have a look at how DPS classes are performing, or at least going to perform for Antorus raid, and basically looking at tier 21 SimulationCraft results. Now, before the people are going to complain and say SimulationCraft should not be taken into account, there's going to be balance changes, things like that, I completely understand. There's a big disclaimer in this video. I'm saying that tier 21 SimulationCraft results are not the best way to determine which class is the best, and there's multiple things to consider when looking at SimulationCraft results. There's multiple advantages, there's multiple disadvantages. Let's have a look at the disadvantages first. First of all, SimulationCraft results for tier 21 are looking at basically just patchwork style fights where there is basically no movement. The class is going to perform at like 99-100% optimal rotation. So that's basically rules out about 99% of the fights in Antorus or even in Tumas Sargeras, because there really isn't a patchwork style fight in any of the raid. There hasn't been a fight like this. The interesting part about SimulationCraft results is that it's good to see how a single target DPS classes are going to perform. How powerful single target is going to be for each of the classes, and basically to see the specific legendary and item combo that these theory crafters have submitted for each of the class, because it's going to provide the biggest single target increase. So when you look at SimulationCraft results, you see the tier 21. It does not mean that every single class is going to be using tier 21 4-set bonus. For example, Boomkins in this SimulationCraft result are using tier 24 set and tier 21 2-set, because the tier 21 for Boomkins, it's not amazing. So how does SimulationCraft results work? Basically, each of your class theory crafter is going to submit a build of gear, a build of legendaries and talents and things like that, that's going to be the most optimal for a single target fight. So you're not going to see just tier 21, you're going to see a combination of tier 20, you're going to see a different combination of talents. For example, a lot of people for Affliction Warlocks are telling, why are the Affliction Warlock using Siphon Life instead of Soul Conduit? Main reason for that, because most people would be using Soul Conduit for single target, but Siphon Life just is going to provide a more reliable DPS, which is more important for SimCraft. And it also has synergy with tier 20, with tier 21. Therefore, it makes it better talent for simulation. And that's so when a lot of people are going to be looking at SimulationCraft and going to be saying, I don't like the legendaries they're using, I don't like the talents that they're using. These talents and these legendaries are not chosen at random. These are not done by your average Jane or Joe. These are done by the theory crafters of each of your class. They have determined the best combo for single target. So it's not only interesting to see how classes can perform on single target, it's also very interesting to see what kind of tier combos, what kind of legendary combos are going to be most likely the best for single target. Now, this disclaimer is kind of over, but before I'm going to address issues with class balancing, because there most likely will be some sort of class balancing patch coming out. A lot of people have pointed out that in the last dev Q&A, they mentioned there's not going to be a big class balance patch coming with Antorus.
Any plans for balancing underperforming specs before Antorus?
Probably not. I think at this.
But that does not mean that there's not going to be some kind of a tuning done during or after Antorus release, because we saw before there's been some kind of a hotfixes or emergency hotfixes made before the mythic Antorus was before the mythic new raid has been released. So, for example, hunters have been changed a lot in the previous patches. So there is a high possibility there's going to be some kind of a tier 21 tuning. There's a high possibility there's going to be some kind of a class balance changes. But it's also possible that your class might not be affected, because there's already been a lot of changes to tier 21. So take this disclaimer or this discussion for the SimulationCraft with a big grain of salt, because there's a lot of things that can change. But it's interesting to see. It is very interesting to see what kind of single target DPS each class can produce, because even on AoE fights, for example, Mr. Sajin, if there's going to be a similar fight, Mythic Mr. Sajin, where the ad DPS or ads were not a priority, because ads can be taken down by 1 or 2 classes, like a Boomkin can almost solo the ads. Priority was to get the boss as low as possible. So even on AoE fight, like Mr. Sajin, single target DPS was probably, or was a lot more important than killing the ads in time, because that could have been done by like 1 or 2 class. So it's very important to see single target DPS optimization, or to see how well each class can perform, because single target can be important even on AoE fights. So let's begin. So as you can see from the SimulationCraft results, there's quite a few surprises, and there's a lot of classes that were predicted to do well on single target, and they're kind of delivering to that. You can see at the very top the 2 warrior specs. Now you have to keep in mind that there's around 3 classes that there's been a lot of discussion about which spec is going to be the best. And there's been a lot of discussion about warriors, there's been a lot of discussion about Death Knights, and there's been a lot of discussion about rogues. Now people have been trying to see which spec is going to perform best. Fury seems to be like the spec that's going to be gaining a bit more, just purely on the fact of the tier 21. So there might not be a huge differentiation between arms. Like arms was considered as one of the best single target DPS specs in Tomb of Sargeras. And a lot of people have been considering that Fury might be a really good spec to go for Antorus. Now it's really hard to actually predict that. Just keep in mind that there is some kind of a flip-flopping going around between some of the classes. Now the same thing kind of affected also Death Knights. That Unholy Death Knights was probably the best PvE spec to go in Tomb of Sargeras. And a lot of people have been looking at Frost DKs purely for the fact because Frost DK tier 21 is extremely strong. A lot of people were seeing numbers, like they were saying like 13% from just the tier 21 4 set. So Frost DKs were looking really strong in Antorus. And there's a chance, now keep that in mind, there's a chance that Frost might be the spec to go once you get tier 21 4 set in Antorus. But that's still really hard to decide. And again, a lot of people have been discussing rogues. A lot of people were discussing how broken subtlety rogues were with the legendary shoulders. If you didn't have the legendary shoulders as a subtlety rogue, you probably shouldn't be playing subtlety rogue, or the DPS would be really, really down. So the people who were playing subtlety rogues but didn't have the legendary shoulders were considering to go assassination or like maybe even outlaw. You can see from this SimulationCraft results that subtlety and assassination and even outlaw are really not really that far behind each other on the single target. And especially considering a lot of people have been talking about sin rogues, and especially because of the tier 21, they are considering the viability of assassination rogues maybe becoming a better spec. But again, this is really hard to see, but keep that in mind. There is some kind of a flip-flopping between classes considering different specs going into Antorus. If we look into SimulationCraft a bit more, we can see here at least balanced Druids doing basically mid of the table. It's kind of disappointing to see Ferals being at bottom, considering that Ferals were considered as a good single target class, and being them at the bottom is a little bit disappointing. But again, a lot of things can change, and this is a patchwork type fight where there's no movement involved at all. You can also see Enhancement Shamans there. Considering Enhancement Shaman tier 21 is considered to be okay-ish, but Enhancement Shaman tier 21 is purely a single target tier, so there's no surprise to see enhancements to be quite high up there. Another thing I can say, like Shadow Priests are doing pretty well. It's no surprise because Shadow Priest tier 21 before the nerf was actually really strong on AoE. There was a big nerf happening to Shadow Priest tier 21 that kind of made it a pure single target tier. So Shadow Priest will be looking to use tier 21 for single target, and they're simming really, really well. The same kind of thing with Demon Hunters, Havoc Demon Hunters. Now, I've been told that Demon Hunters are simming so well because it requires a really good metamorphosis timing in order to actually achieve these numbers. So On live servers in Antorus, where there's going to be movement, where there's going to be more chaotic stuff happening, it's going to be really hard to time your metamorphosis at the right times and things like that. So it's going to be really hard to achieve those numbers as a demon hunter, but that's yet to be seen. But it's nice to see that Havoc demon hunters are simming really well. You can also consider that Windwalker monks are there with tier 21. They're using for this SimCraft, they're using tier 21 4-set. Of course, because tier 19 and tier 20 was heavily nerfed a couple of weeks ago. So they are stuck with tier 21 4-set for the time being. It's really interesting to see that Arcane Mages are simming pretty well as well. In Tomb of Sargeras, Arcane was considered as an AoE spec. They weren't really doing that well on single target. Right now you can see that Arcane is actually not that far away from Frost. So maybe Arcane Mages are going to be at least somewhat viable in Antorus, considering that they were quite poor in Tomb of Sargeras in the whole expansion, in the whole raid basically. You can also see that Warlocks there's no surprise seeing Demonology Warlocks being up there in single target. Demonology Warlocks were always considered as one of the best single target specs for Warlocks. But of course, in a real life scenario where there's heavy movement involved, maybe there's a bit more spread AoE, Affliction usually tends to go ahead. And even though Affliction is simming worse on single target than Demonology, like I said, players are not going to play perfect. There's going to be movement involved. There's going to be some spread AoE, and Affliction tends to do really well in those kind of scenarios. It's also interesting to see Marksmanship hunters doing well. It's not really interesting. They were kind of mid-table to top. What I want to cover next is basically the gearing. The gear that they used here. Not every single class in here used tier 21 4-set for single target. Not every single class. Now, we'll do kind of like a ranking or list for this. And you can also see that Fury was actually simming quite one of the best single target specs at the moment. But it's also worth noting that they were using tier 21 4-set with Convergence of Fate, 905 Convergence of Fate. So Convergence of Fate is still really strong for Fury warriors on single target, at least based on the sims. So it's also, you also have to keep in mind that there's some of these trinkets that are really hard to get, or it's going to be really hard to get on Taurus. And those trinkets from previous tiers can contribute still a massive amount of DPS. So Boomkins and Marksmanship Hunters were the only two classes that were opted to use tier 20 4-set with tier 21 2-set. And that's mainly because it based on the tier crafting work, is that those sets provide the best single target DPS. Now we're not sure how it's going to sim on AoE, but guaranteed you can say that Boomkin tier 21 set is pretty poor, and a lot of Boomkins are opting to use tier 21 4-set if it's heavily Titan Forged. So it's basically not a great tier set. Now, you had another 4 classes who used tier 22 sets. Sub-Rogues and Assassination Rogues opted to use tier 21 4-set with tier 20 2-set. Frost Mages used the same combination of tier 21 4-set and tier 22 set, and as well as Arcane Mages used tier 21 4-set and tier 22 set. Now it's worth considering that why are they using this? Why are they using these different tiers? Because there's been a lot of simulations run for each of your class. All of these tier crafters did their work, and they determined that this kind of combination of sets will provide the best single target. So it's worth noting that if maybe you are a Frost Mage, it's worth picking up that tier 22 set. Maybe try and get it as high Titan Forged, and you probably maybe stick with it, at least for single target for the time being. So this has been a preliminary look at SimCraft results. Like I said at the start of the video for like a long time, that it is not guaranteed. It's not an indication of what class is going to be the best. Like I said, it is a patchwork fight, single target, no movement, perfect rotation by SimCraft. It's really interesting to see what kind of gear though to use. I feel that this is a good indication of the talents that are going to be really good, legendaries that are going to be good for single target. So it's worth picking up those tier 20s if you are a specific class. And I feel, like I said, single target can be good on AoE fights as well, where priority adds are important, and getting that ad down really fast is going to be really important. But like I said as well before that, there are a couple of classes whose spec are not known to be which is going to be the best. Like example, Warriors, Fury, Arms, which is going to be the best. The Frost DKs, Unholy DKs, we're still not completely sure. Same with the Rogues. So, like I mentioned, it is really hard to determine which spec is going to be best, but these SimCraft results can help you determine the gear, can help you determine maybe an inkling of an indication of what kind of single target DPS these classes are going to provide. It's also worth noting that even if your class is simming pretty low, it is important to really look at the whole class as a whole, because a lot of the classes can provide amazing utility. Especially we saw this in Tomb of Sargeras or Tomb of Soulgeras, where things like sub-rogues, even assassination rogues, were chosen as one of the progression classes. Even though maybe the DPS, let's say for a sub-rogue who didn't have the legendary shoulders, the DPS could possibly be lower, but the amount of utility, the survivability that they provide, they were basically used to soak all of the things in Mythic Avatar and Mythical Jaden and make the fight doable. Even though the DPS might not have been the best, their utility provided such important aspect to the fight that it allowed the guild to progress further. So you have to also look at the utility that class provides, and even though your class might be at the bottom of the DPS meters, you might be saving the raid, or you might be allowing the raid to progress further by just bringing your class. So thank you guys for watching this video. Let me know how you feel about these rankings. Please keep in mind that if there is going to be some changes made in the next couple of weeks, or like I mentioned before, there was no patch expected before Antorus hits, but there's probably going to be some kind of a class tuning, maybe hotfixes coming in before Mythic Antorus unlocks a week after that. So let me know how you feel about this video. Let me know how you feel about your class single target. Let me know if you need to pick up those tier 20s. And thank you for watching this guide, and I'll see you next time.